In the bright, swirling chaos of the America's Got Talent backstage area where dancers practiced flips, magicians shuffled cards, and singers warmed up their voices, Marco de la Cruz stood silently in the corner, holding an old guitar whose body was covered with faded Elvis Presley stickers. The stickers were peeling at the edges, their colors cracked from years of handling, yet Marco rubbed them gently with the pads of his thumbs, as if polishing something sacred. He didn't look like the kind of person anyone expected to shock an arena of thousands. He wasn't dressed in flashy sequins or a suit. He wore a simple light denim jacket, slightly frayed at the cuffs, and a pair of worn black shoes he had polished the night before with cooking oil because he couldn't afford shoe polish. The stage manager glanced at him for barely a second. Another nervous contestant, nothing special. But Marco wasn't like the others. He had arrived 3 hours early, too anxious to wait at home. He had sat in his truck rehearsing every line they might ask him on stage, his voice trembling with the weight of the moment. This wasn't just an audition. This wasn't just a dream. This was a promise. When a crew member finally called contestant 3021 Marco de la Cruz, his heart thudded so loudly he felt the vibration in his throat. "That's me," he whispered, although the words caught halfway out. He followed the staff member down the narrow corridor, toward the main stage. With each step, the noise grew louder, the crowd cheering, the judges laughing, the bass from the speakers trembling through the floor. Marco's hand tightened on the guitar so hard his knuckles turned white, but then he paused just before the final curtain, closed his eyes, and breathed deep. He remembered another night years ago, when he stood outside a diner, shivering, hungry, lost, with no clue how to start his life in America. He remembered the cold, the loneliness, the fear. He remembered the voice of an old man humming an Elvis song and the warmth that followed. He opened his eyes, steadier now. One of the crew whispered, "Good luck. You'll be amazing." Marco nodded, though he didn't believe it. He wasn't here to be amazing. He was here to honor someone. The curtain drew back, and the blinding lights of the AGT stage washed over him. For a moment Marco froze. Thousands of people sat before him, their faces illuminated by stage lights and phone screens. The judges' panel glowed at the front, Sophia smiling warmly, Heidi leaning forward, Howie adjusting his glasses, and Simon sharp-eyed, unreadable, studying Marco like he could see right through him. It was quiet. Too quiet. Marco cleared his throat. "Hi, I'm Marco," he said, his voice thin. Heidi Klum smiled. "Hi Marco, where are you from?" "From the Philippines," he replied, his accent soft and warm, "but I live in Nevada now." "How long have you been singing?" Sophia asked. Marco swallowed. I sing on my breaks. At work. I'm a janitor." There wasn't shame in his voice, just a quiet honesty that tugged at hearts. Howie raised his brows. "A janitor? And now you're standing here on the biggest stage in the world. That's amazing already." Marco nodded, grateful. "Thank you, sir." Then Simon leaned in. The room always changed when he spoke. "What made you decide to audition for us today?" he asked, not unkindly, but with that searching depth that always made contestants tell more than they planned. Marco hesitated. His fingers moved instinctively across the guitar, brushing the Elvis stickers, and for a moment he wasn't standing on a massive stage anymore. He was back in that quiet diner, listening to the old man who had saved him. He lifted his head. "I'm here to sing Elvis," Marco said softly, "for the man who taught me kindness." The crowd rustled. A few people leaned forward. Simon sat back, crossing his arms, intrigued. Marco's voice cracked just slightly as he continued, "When I first came to America, I was lost. I didn't know anybody. I didn't even know English well. But someone helped me, a stranger, a veteran. He played Elvis songs every night, and he taught me the words." He took a breath, his eyes glossy. "He taught me more than English. He taught me hope." The judges exchanged glances. The audience quieted completely. Marco looked down at his guitar, tracing the edges of the stickers with something like reverence. "This guitar, he found it at a garage sale. $10. He smiled faintly. "He told me, 'Son, you don't need much to make music, you just need a story.'" "And do you have one?" Simon asked, his tone lower now, gentler. Marco's answer was barely above a whisper. "I think tonight is part of it." Something shifted in the room then. It was subtle, like a collective exhale, like thousands of strangers silently rooting for a man who had carried more pain than he ever showed. Marco didn't look like a star. He didn't look like a showman. He looked like someone who had survived. Someone who had learned gratitude the hard way. Someone who had chosen kindness every time life told him to give up. He stepped toward the center of the stage. The lights dimmed, the cameras zoomed in. His trembling hands positioned the guitar and he gently placed a foot forward, grounding himself. "Whenever you're ready," Simon said. Marco inhaled, slow and deep. He could feel the weight of his journey pressing down on him. The nights he cleaned hotel hallway, alone. The hours he spent sending money back home. The moments he doubted he had any worth at all. But he also felt something else. The warmth of a man who had fed him when he was starving, sheltered him when he was afraid, and taught him music when he had nothing to give in return. Marco lifted his head. When he spoke again, his voice was steadier, clearer, full of something that made the entire auditorium lean closer. "This song," he said, "is for the person who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." And with that, Marco strummed the first trembling chord, unaware that within the next few minutes he would bring the entire arena to tears and shock, even Simon Cowell himself. For a moment after Marco finished speaking, the judges seemed suspended, caught between curiosity and a sudden, deeper compassion. Something in his trembling voice had opened a quiet place in every listener's heart. "Tell us more," Heidi encouraged softly, sensing the weight behind his words. Marco drew a slow breath. His fingers brushed the guitar strings, not to play, just to hold something familiar as he dove into memories that still felt tender. The stage lights softened, giving him a gentler glow, and the entire auditorium leaned into the silence. "I came to America when I was 21, he began, eyes fixed on a distant point that only he could see. "My family sold everything they could so I could fly here. They said, 'Go, make a better life.' And I promised them I would." He paused, swallowing hard. "But when I got here, it wasn't like the movies." A few people in the audience nodded knowingly. Marco continued, his voice growing steadier as he let himself remember. "I had 2 pairs of clothes, $40 and no English. I washed dishes at a diner in the daytime and cleaned parking lots at night. The first few weeks I slept wherever I could, on break room carpets, in my truck. Sometimes I fell asleep sitting on a milk crate behind the kitchen." Howie leaned forward, empathy softening his expression. "So one night," Marco said, "I was so tired, I couldn't even stand up straight. It was cold, and I didn't have a jacket. I was waiting behind the diner for the manager to close up, just sitting there hugging myself to stay warm." His throat tightened. "And then I heard music." The audience stilled. Even the camera seemed to stop moving. Marco's eyes softened in memory. It was faint at first, just a humming, but it sounded familiar, like something I'd heard in an old movie back home. Then I recognized it. Can't help falling in love. Elvis. He smiled, small, nostalgic. "You know that feeling when you hear a song from another time, and suddenly it becomes a lifeline?" Sophia nodded, wiping the corner of her eye. "The humming got louder," Marco said, "and then the back door of the diner opened. I saw this older man standing there. White hair, big glasses, wearing a navy jacket. His smile grew just a little. He said, 'Son, you look like a frozen chicken. Get in here.'" The crowd chuckled warmly. Marco's voice softened. I tried to say no, I didn't want trouble. But he insisted. He sat me down at the counter, put a blanket around my shoulders, and made me hot soup. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't treat me like I was a problem. He just cared. The screens behind him lit up with a soft, warm glow, golden light, like a diner at midnight. "He told me his name was Mr. Thompson," Marco said. "A retired Navy veteran. He came to the diner every night, because he said the silence of his home was louder than any crowd. His wife had passed away a few years earlier. His kids lived far away." Simon's features noticeably softened. "The first thing he asked me," Marco continued, "was if I liked Elvis Presley." Marco laughed lightly. "At the time, I didn't know much about Elvis except the movies my uncle used to watch. But Mr. Thompson, he loved Elvis. He said Elvis was the soundtrack to his youth. So every night after that," Marco said, "if I finished work early I'd sit with him. He'd bring this little portable radio, old and dented, and he'd play Elvis songs. And while the songs played he taught me English." He held up his guitar. "He taught me music too." The audience sighed in unison. "He showed me how to strum basic chords, simple at first. And he'd tap the table and say, 'Feel it, son. Music's not in the fingers, it's in the heart.'" Marco blinked away tears. He had patience when no one else did. He had kindness when kindness was the last thing I expected. Now the lights dimmed further, drawing the entire room into Marco's memory. One night, after we listened to Love Me Tender for the 100th time, he told me something I'll never forget. Marco looked down, reciting the words like they were etched into him. Life isn't about becoming important. It's about becoming someone who makes others feel they matter. He let the words linger, let them settle over the crowd. From then on, Marco continued, he wasn't just a customer. He became my family. The judges exchanged glances, deeply moved. I didn't grow up with a father, Marco confessed quietly. But with him, I felt what it was like to have someone believe in you, to have someone cheer for you, to have someone say, you matter. The audience sniffed and dabbed at tears. Marco took another breath. He's the one who found this guitar for me. $10 at a garage sale. He chuckled. He said, it's not much to look at, but you'll make it sing. He ran a thumb across the peeling Elvis sticker. He asked me to promise him one thing, Marco said softly. He said, if you ever get a chance to sing for people, sing for someone who needs hope as much as you did. That line hit the audience like a gentle punch to the heart. Marco went quiet. His eyes glistened. His chest rose and fell with emotion. The pause stretched, not awkward but sacred, a moment where thousands of strangers held their breath with him. Then he lifted his head. Mr. Thompson got sick last year, he said, voice trembling. He hasn't been able to visit the diner much. But he still calls me. Still reminds me to sing with heart. And tonight is the first time I'm singing on a real stage. He looked at the judges, his gaze steady. I'm not here to win. I'm here because he gave me hope when I had none. So tonight I sing for him. The audience erupted in warm applause, supportive, emotional, deeply moved. Simon didn't smile, he rarely did in moments like this. But his jaw clenched just slightly, and his eyes glimmered with something real. A respect, a recognition, a softness. He spoke quietly, but his voice rang through the entire auditorium. Marco, that might be one of the most beautiful reasons for singing I've ever heard. And with that, the stage lights shifted, brightening, warming, ready to carry Marco into the moment that would change his life. The theater dimmed into a hush so deep, it felt like the entire world leaned forward. Marco stepped to the center of the stage, adjusting the strap of his old guitar. His heart pounded so loudly he wondered if the microphones might pick it up. The spotlight softened around him, a warm circle of light that made him look almost fragile, like a man standing on the edge of something sacred, something terrifying, something life-changing. The music director gave him a gentle nod from the wings. Marco lifted his trembling hand and strummed a gentle chord. The first note wavered slightly in the silence, uncertain, searching, but it rang true. A single sound, trembling yet sincere, like a prayer whispered into the dark. Then he began to sing, and from the very first line, something shifted. His voice, soft, steady, unmistakably from the heart. Wise men say, only fools rush in. The words floated into the air like smoke rising from a candle. Soft, pure, honest. A ripple moved through the audience. People suddenly sat taller. Some leaned forward unconsciously, drawn to something they couldn't yet explain. Marco's voice wasn't a copy. It wasn't a performance. It was a memory, warm, lived in, overflowing with gratitude. He sang like someone who had held pain in both hands, and survived it. With each line, his confidence grew. His voice deepened, gained richness, took on a velvet smoothness that made more than one person gasp. The sound wasn't just beautiful, it was real. And real always hits the heart harder than perfect. Even Simon, stunned, Simon Cowell, who had seen everything, felt his eyes narrowing. Not in skepticism but astonishment. His posture changed. First slowly leaning forward, then sitting straighter, and finally without meaning, to his lips parted slightly. Like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. This wasn't the shy janitor who whispered on stage moments ago. This was a storyteller. A soul singer. A man carrying the weight of years in every note. Marco's voice slid into the second verse with more power, more control, more emotion than anyone expected from someone holding a $10 guitar. Simon's eyebrows lifted, a rare expression that told the audience exactly what he was thinking. Where has this man been hiding? The audience, frozen, then overwhelmed. Somewhere in the center rose. A woman clasped her hand to her chest and whispered, "Oh my God." A teenager lowered her phone, forgetting to record. An older couple leaned closer together, as if Marco's voice pulled them back to their own memories, dances in high school gyms, first kisses, long ago summers. Marco didn't see any of it. His eyes were closed. He wasn't singing for the audience. He wasn't singing for the judges. He wasn't even singing for himself. He was singing for Mr. Thompson. Every lyric carried the warmth of diner lights at midnight. Every note echoed the lessons of a lonely veteran, who found comfort in an old radio. Every breath was gratitude. A voice with history behind it. When Marco reached the bridge, something powerful happened. His voice cracked not from fear, but from emotion on the word love. That single imperfection made the audience collectively inhale. Because that crack wasn't a mistake. It was a story. A life. A thank you. He steadied himself, pressed forward, letting the rawness show. And somehow, it made the song more beautiful. People weren't just listening, they were feeling. Marco could almost hear Mr. Thompson's voice in his mind, sing from the heart, son. People don't need perfect, they need true. So he leaned into truth. The judges, moved beyond words. Howie's eyes were wide with admiration. Heidi pressed a hand over her heart. Sophia mouthed, wow, softly, stunned. But Simon did something rare. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He didn't blink much. He just felt. There was a tightness in his jaw, the kind that appears when someone fights off an emotion they weren't expecting. His fingers tapped once on the desk, a small but telling signal. Simon only did that when something hit him deeper than he was ready to admit. Marco transforms before their eyes as the music swelled toward the final chorus. Marco's posture changed. He stood taller. His shoulders relaxed. His voice opened wide, rich and full, the theater resonating with every ounce of courage he had left. The transformation was breathtaking to watch. He didn't look like a janitor anymore. He didn't look like a man who had spent nights sleeping in a truck. He didn't look like someone who had been invisible most of his life. He looked like someone who belonged on the stage, someone born for this moment. The final note, a moment of absolute silence when Marco reached the last line. But I can't help falling in love with you. His voice thinned to a fragile whisper, trembling with gratitude and love and everything he couldn't put into words. He drew out the final note gently, letting it fade into the stillness of the arena, until there was nothing left but silence. Actual silence, the kind that only comes when thousands of people are stunned into stillness, afraid to breathe, afraid to break the spell. Marco opened his eyes. For a heartbeat, he thought he had somehow failed. The stillness was so heavy, so absolute. But then, someone stood. Then another. Then the entire front section of the audience surged to their feet. And finally, the whole arena rose together in a wave of applause, so thunderous it felt like the walls were shaking. People clapped, cheered, cried, shouted his name. Marco staggered back a step, overwhelmed. He had never been applauded in his life. Not once. Not by a crowd this big. Not by anyone beyond a diner counter. He swallowed hard, tears blurring his vision. Simon's expression. Something no one expected, while everyone else clapped. Simon remained seated for a long moment, still staring at Marco. He wasn't unmoved. He wasn't indifferent. He was processing. Finally, slowly, deliberately, Simon stood. The audience erupted even louder, a rare privilege. A silent standing ovation from Simon Cowell himself. Marco's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't the applause. It wasn't the lights or the attention. It was what Simon's eyes held as he looked at him: respect, awe, humanity. Something deeper. Something like belief. And for Marco, a man who had once felt invisible in this vast country, that moment alone was enough to change everything. The applause finally began to fade. Not because people wanted it to end, but because they were desperate to hear what the judges would say. Marco stood on the stage, trembling, his hands still wrapped around the neck of his worn guitar, as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. He had expected the moment to feel loud, overwhelming, chaotic. Instead it felt quiet inside him, soft, sacred. A stunned hush fell over the entire auditorium as the judges prepared to speak. Heidi was the first to recover. She leaned toward her microphone, smiling through glistening eyes. Marco, that was beautiful. Truly, your voice is like warmth, like sunlight. I felt every word. Marco nodded gratefully, though he could barely breathe. Sophia followed, fanning her face dramatically. I am emotional. I don't know what you did to me, but this, she gestured helplessly at her heart, I felt it here. It was so real, so genuine. Howie chimed in next. There are singers who perform, and there are singers who live the song. You, Marco, you lived it. The audience responded with thunderous cheers. But then everything settled again as Simon leaned forward, elbows on the table, hands clasped, studying Marco with an intensity that made the room go silent. The kind of silence that hangs heavy like something important is about to happen. Marco, Simon began slowly, "There's something I need to ask you." Marco's breath hitched. Everyone in the room stiffened, waiting. Simon didn't look harsh. He didn't look skeptical. He looked thoughtful, curious, moved. But his voice carried the weight of a man who had witnessed thousands of voices, was searching for the one thing that separated this performance from all the rest. "Why," Simon asked, "did you choose this song, for this moment?" Marco blinked. He hadn't expected the question. His heart thudded painfully in his chest. He looked down briefly at his guitar before lifting his gaze again. "Because," he began uncertainly, "this was the first English song I ever learned." Simon nodded slowly. "Yes, you said that earlier. But tonight, you didn't just sing it as a memory." He leaned in further. "You sang it like someone who has loved deeply and lost deeply." A soft gasp rippled through the audience. Marco froze. He hadn't planned to say anything more. He thought he'd already told enough. But Simon's voice, gentle, probing, opened something inside him that he had kept locked away for months. He closed his eyes for a second. And then he spoke. "The truth he hadn't meant to share, Mr. Thompson," Marco whispered, his voice trembling. "He's in hospice now." The audience fell so silent you could hear a dropped pin hit the stage. Marco swallowed, trying to steady himself. He doesn't have much time left." Heidi's eyes widened with sadness. Sophia covered her mouth. Even Howie looked stricken. Simon softened, noticeably. "I promised him," Marco continued, voice shaking, "that if I ever got the chance to sing on a big stage, I'd sing this song so he could hear me." He glanced upward, fighting the quiver in his lip. "But he was too weak to come tonight. And I don't know if he was able to watch the live show. I don't know if he saw it." A few audience members wiped their tears. Marco took a breath that trembled through his whole body. "So I sang, hoping that wherever he is, here or somewhere higher, he could hear me. Even if it was just for a moment." The judges moved beyond words. Heidi's eyes were full of tears. "Oh honey," Sophia whispered, "oh my God," under her breath. Howie placed a hand over his heart. That is love. That is what love looks like." Then all eyes turned again to Simon. Marco braced himself. Simon exhaled slowly, not dramatically, not for the cameras, just a human breath, deep and real, as though he needed a moment to gather himself. "Marco," he said finally, "there are performances you forget, and there are performances that stay with you forever." His voice grew softer. "And I will never forget this one." Marco's knees nearly buckled. Simon continued, "It wasn't perfect vocally. And I don't care. What matters is soul, heart, truth, and you brought all three." He paused, eyes glistening just the tiniest bit. "And if your friend, your mentor, your father figure, if he heard you tonight, I promise you he's proud." Marco pressed a hand to his mouth, overwhelmed, tears spilling freely. Then Simon pushed his chair back, and stood, not slowly this time, but with purpose. The audience reacted instantly. Cheers, screams, even a few shocked gasps. Simon walked to the judges' table, where the golden buzzer glowed under his hand. He stared at it for a heartbeat, then looked up at Marco. His voice carried across the entire arena. "Some people come here hoping for a moment, but some people come here and give us one." He placed his hand over the golden buzzer. "And you, Marco, you just gave us one of the most heartfelt moments we've seen on this stage." Marco's breath hitched violently. Simon pressed down. Hard. The golden buzzer moment, the confetti burst. Gold exploded from the rafters like shimmering rain. The audience erupted into deafening cheers. Marco's eyes widened, his whole body shaking as golden flakes swirled around him, sticking to his hair, his cheeks, the old guitar against his chest. He covered his face with both hands, sobbing openly, years of exhaustion, gratitude, and love pouring out at once. The music swelled. The lights brightened. The judges stood, applauding and cheering him on. As Marco dropped to his knees in disbelief, the golden confetti cascading around him, one thought echoed through his mind, "Mr. Thompson, I hope you saw this." The golden confetti had long settled, swept away by stagehands who were still buzzing with the kind of excitement only a once-in-a-season moment could create. The Dolby Theater, so often the home of dreams rising or falling, now felt as if it were breathing softer, more reverently. Something sacred had just happened there. Something the walls themselves would remember. Miguel was backstage, hands trembling, not from fear now, but from disbelief, from gratitude so big it didn't know where to fit in his chest. He sat on a small folding chair, the same kind technicians used, its metal edges cold against his palms. But he hardly noticed. He was replaying everything again and again, as if trying to convince himself it had truly been real. The way the crowd had risen, the moment he belted the final Elvis note, The way Simon Cowell. Simon had pressed the golden buzzer, with a look of awe that almost resembled childlike wonder, the way his mother had cried, covering her mouth as if afraid her heart would spill right out onto the floor. Every detail felt like a miracle wrapped inside a dream. He squeezed his eyes shut, and whispered, "Lord, thank you." Across the room, Simon Cowell pushed through a curtain and stepped backstage, still brushing flecks of gold from his dark shirt. His face was softer than usual, almost reflective. When he spotted Miguel, he walked over quietly, giving the boy a moment to realize who was standing in front of him. Miguel blinked. "Sir Simon." Simon placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did something extraordinary tonight." Miguel swallowed hard. "Thank you, sir. I still can't believe this is real." "You shouldn't thank me," Simon said, shaking his head. "I didn't give you anything. You earned every second of that moment." Miguel looked down, humbled. "I just wanted to make people feel something. Like Elvis made my dad feel when he was alive." Simon's eyes widened slightly. "Your father?" Miguel nodded. "He passed away last year, but he used to sing Elvis songs to me, especially when life got hard. Those songs, his voice, they kept me strong. Tonight, I wanted to honor him, to show the world the love he gave me." There was a pause. A heavy one, not sad, just full. Simon's voice lowered. "He would be incredibly proud of you." Miguel's throat tightened. "I hope so." Just then, someone rushed in, a crew member, flustered but excited. "Miguel, there's someone here asking for you. Says he has to see you." Miguel frowned. "Who?" The crew member stepped aside, and there, in the doorway, stood an elderly Filipino man in a neatly pressed barong, holding a worn-out envelope in his hand. His hair was white, his back slightly bent, but his eyes were bright with emotion. Miguel gasped. Tito Ramon, his father's best friend. The godfather he hadn't seen since the funeral. Ramon stepped forward, his voice trembling. "Anak, I flew from Manila the moment I heard you auditioned. I didn't know if I'd make it in time, but I prayed." Miguel rushed to him, embracing him tightly. The old man held him with the kind of grip only someone who had loved your father like a brother could give. "I promised your papa," Ramon whispered. "If you ever chased your dream, I would stand where he couldn't." Miguel broke down right there, tears pouring, shoulders shaking. For a moment, he was no longer the golden buzzer act, no longer the singer who had stunned a global audience. He was just a son being held by the closest thing he had left of his father. Ramon slowly pulled out the old envelope. "Your father, he wrote this before he passed. He made me swear to give it to you. Only on the day you finally believed in yourself enough to sing for the world." Miguel's hands shook as he took the letter. The paper was soft, aged, like it had been opened and closed many times by hands filled with longing. He unfolded it delicately. "My son, if you are reading this, it means you found your courage. Music is your gift, but your heart is your power. Sing not to impress but to lift people. Sing for the lonely, the hurting, the forgotten, and when they hear you, let them feel kindness." Papa Miguel pressed the letter to his chest as tears streamed down his cheeks. Simon, watching quietly from a few feet away, blinked hard. He wasn't the kind to show emotion easily, but something about the moment this Filipino boy clutching his father's words hit him in a place he didn't often let the world see. Then, unexpectedly, Simon cleared his throat. "Miguel." Miguel looked up, wiping his eyes. Simon continued, "Your story, your voice, what you carry inside you, that's bigger than this show. But this stage is now yours. Use it well. Use it the way your father dreamed you would." Miguel nodded, still overwhelmed. "I will, sir, I promise." A few minutes later, he stepped outside the theater, where the Los Angeles night air greeted him with gentle coolness. City lights glittered above, like scattered diamonds. People from all over, Americans, Filipinos, tourists, families came rushing up to him. "You made me cry, man. My mom loved Elvis. Thank you for bringing his spirit back. You sang from the heart. Don't ever lose that." A little boy tugged at his sleeve, holding a homemade sign that said, "You inspire me," in shaky marker letters. Miguel knelt down. "Do you sing too?" he asked. The boy nodded shyly. "But I'm scared." Miguel placed his golden buzzer-glittered hand over the boy's. "I was scared too, but someone believed in me. And now, I believe in you. Don't stop singing, okay?" The boy's eyes sparkled. As Miguel stood again, looking at the diverse crowd of strangers cheering for him, he felt something shift within him, something profound. This wasn't just about talent. It wasn't even about Elvis or his father anymore. It was about connection, about kindness, about the power of a song carried from one generation to another, from one culture to another, from one heart to the next. And in that moment, Miguel understood fully, he hadn't just honored his father tonight. He had lifted people just like the letter said. Just like he was meant to. With a deep breath, he looked up at the sky and whispered, "This is for you, Papa. The world heard us." And somewhere far above the golden lights of Los Angeles, the stars seemed to glow just a little brighter.